Anyway, we're going to try to have a very interesting program for you. I want to introduce Andy Humphrey. Andy is the owner of Stewart Systems. He's located in a little town in Ohio, and he brought Lucas with him. I don't know if I'm real happy about this guy. He's going to be filming this, so we're going to see. I'll try not to beat him up too bad. We'll see what it looks like after it's done. Anyway, just a short history of Stewart Systems. Stewart Systems was a part of Stewart's Hangar 21. We're located in a little town in Washington State, right in the center part of the state of Kashmir. And we started using the Waterborne systems back in the 90s when it was Aircraft Finishing Systems. We bought that company out and then got our own STC and got everything certified under Part 23 standards. And we developed the process of how to use it. We did the instructional videos, and we've been doing that now for a lot of years. This is my PA-16 clipper. We covered it in 1999 with the Stewart Systems. And I can tell you it still looks great. People ask how long the system is how long it's going to last, and this I can tell you from 1999 to now, it still looks great. I've got close to 1,000 hours on it, and it really does nice. The first years of its life was spent outdoors on the show circuit. It's been to this show, it's been to Oshkosh. I've got all kinds of awards with it. It's just a very nice airplane, very fun to fly. A lot of people say, well, why should I use the Stewart Systems? Well, the first thing, everyone is starting to realize that waterbornes they're the future. Everything's going to water-based waterborne products. The high VOC solvents are on their way out. The chemicals used in MEK and things like that, they're hazardous to your health. The Stewart Systems is non-toxic, it's not flammable. It's easy to use because you have the water cleanup, it's easy to repair. We're tested and certified under Part 23 standards. And that means that we had to go through laboratory testing that was very intense. And so our coatings and everything were tested under 1,000 hours of extreme high UVA, UVB testing. That equaled 5 years, Arizona, noontime sun, 24 hours a day, 5 years. The FAA would allow us to lose 20% of the strength of the fabric, and in our worst case scenario, we lost 0.5%. On a glossometer, after that, Insignia White, we had 0 loss of gloss, equal to 5 years of the Arizona sun. So it's a very amazing high-end coating. We also have outstanding customer support. You call, somebody's going to talk to you. You won't get an answering machine, you'll get a real person. We're going to talk about, we're going to get right into the chemicals now. Whether you're doing a fabric airplane or if you're doing a metal airplane, one of the things that we highly recommend is that you get a quart of EkoClean. Very inexpensive, highly concentrated. It's going to make about 5 gallons of cleaner. We want to clean everything before we prime, before we paint, to get rid of the contamination. We like to use lint-free towels or sponge. Everything, we rinse it, clean it with water. It's also a great degreaser if you do an annual on your airplane. You use a little bit higher strength than 15:1, but it'll absolutely cut the oils and stuff right off of it. It's non-butyl cleaner and very, very nice to use. Another thing that we like to really talk about are the microfiber towels and things like that now that for the painting with the waterbornes is very important. One of the things that we like to use and did use prior to this was the cotton terry towels. You can get them at Costco or whatever. We still use them, but one of the things that we found from customers that they would call and they were having problems, with fish eyes or whatever. And if you use the cotton towels and you take them home and you wash them and you put them through the dryer, don't ever reuse a new cotton towel in a painting process. And the reason for that is if you wash them and put them in a dryer, if it's ever had a dryer sheet that the dryer sheets are silicone, it will contaminate that. You start wiping your parts down and it's a mess. So never reuse towels. Don't buy used towel or rags that have been, recycled and laundered. Stick with the microfiber and the lint-free. That's the only way to go. They cost a little bit, but when you get into your painting and if you get contamination, it's really a mess. We'll talk about the metal prep, and this contains, if you're doing a tube and fabric airplane, which is steel, We like to sandblast them every time. If you're doing a restoration or even a new project, you need to get that mill scale off. Or if you're doing a restoration, we do it because you need to find out if there's any corroded tubing in it. And a lot of times a sandblast will blast right through it and you'll know where to replace that tubing. Aluminum needs to be cleaned and etched. We use our Eco Etch prior to the priming. We say don't etch assemblies. What that means is if you got an airplane, you got it all stripped down, take it apart. Pull the aileron flaps and all that. Don't do it as an assembly all put together. Most of your airplanes like Cessnas and things like that, it's mandatory that you do a rebalance of the parts anyway. So we recommend, because you can't, another thing, if you do an assembly, you really can't get all the etch out of there, and it's really necessary that you do that. We like to rinse and rinse it again, blow off the parts, get the etch out of the rivets. You know, if you ever seen an airplane that's been painted and you see a little blistering around rivets or seams, that's a good chance that the etch didn't get washed away. And that's not just our etch, that's any of them, because they're a phosphoric acid base product. We like to let it dry a minimum of 12 hours before priming. That lets all the moisture on the inside get totally out of there. What happens is if you start rotating the part and there's some moisture inside and it comes out, it can really ruin a paint job. So that's what we recommend on that. Composite prep, we've had customers call and says, your primer's no good, it won't stick to my fiberglass. And I say, well, that release agent that they put on there is doing a very good job. So what you got to do is get that off of the fiberglass parts. It's one of the very few times that we ever recommend lacquer thinner. Lacquer thinner is still a great solvent. It's not near as harsh as your MEK and acetone and things like that. But we'll usually wipe a new fiberglass part down at least twice with lacquer thinner, give it a final rinsing with our EkoClean mixed at the 15:1, and then go ahead and sand it. If you sand prior to doing that, you're going to have the release agent down inside your scratch marks where we're trying to get the primer to stick, and you're not going to have good adhesion. So composite prep, this is really important that you do that. Just don't sand it before you clean it. We're going to talk about our primers. We show two up here, but we're going to talk about all three of them. This is our EkoPrime and our EkoPoxy. The EkoPrime and both of these primers have really good anti-corrosive characteristics. The EkoPrime, if you were to rub on it with lacquer thinner, it will soften it, but that's true of most primers. Now on the EkoPoxy, that's not the case. If you mix it 4:1, our instructions call for 4:1 or 5:1. If you mix that 4:1, a lacquer thinner will not touch it. It won't take it off of there. We do recommend top coating either primer if you're doing tail feathers or any steel. Of course, on an aluminum airplane, you're going to top coat it anyway. The EcoFill is the primer for the fabric, and we talked about that a minute ago. It does four things: fills the weave of the fabric, fire suppressant, it's your UV block, and it's the primer for our EkoPoly Premium top coat on the fabric. We're going to talk about surface prep prior to top coats. A waterborne is a mechanical bond. It's not like a solvents. MEKs and things like that are chemical bonds. So you can get by with a little bit more on a solvent type paint than you can on the waterbornes. It's a very simple thing though. You just got to get it clean. You got to get the dust off of it. One of the problems we had years ago was that we couldn't use a tack cloth because the tack cloths were designed for the solvent-based paints, and the media that was on them was beeswax. So you rub it on there and the little particles of beeswax would come off and get on the waterborne paint, and you'd have little fish eyes. The solvent paints, it was a problem for them too, but they could put a fisheye eliminator in there and that would take care of it. You'd give up a little bit of quality of the paint, but it would work. So anyway, we now have tack cloths designed for waterbornes, and they do a great job. You double check your surface before you're painting, make sure everything's right. You sand, wipe, blow. The tack rag is the final step before you put the primer or the top coat on. We're going to wipe the surface with isopropyl, 90 instead of 70. We're going to talk quite a bit about that. We got here in a few minutes, we're going to get into the alcohol and the uses of it and how we're going to do that. Don't wipe before you do your top coat. It's not so true with primer because they're water-based. The top coat is waterborne. A lot of people think because it's a waterborne product, you mix it with water, that you can wipe your primer down with water or heavy-duty cleaner and it works. Not true. This paint does not like water. If it goes on anything that has moisture in it, it's going to fisheye. So you wipe it with the alcohol. We'll get into that. Don't wipe it down with water or heavy-duty cleaner unless you're going to paint it the next day. The final wipe of the tack cloth is that's the last thing. Once you wipe that with a tack cloth, you're ready to spray. That last one there says use the low angle light to see the residue. I'm not sure if you know what that means. We'll talk about that. A lot of guys on the composite or the aluminum, it's pretty important. You can do it on fabric as well. But if you ever been to a car show in all these really nice shiny cars, the first thing guys do is they get down beside it and they want to see if there's any ripples down the side of these real nice cars. That's low angle light inspection. So you use the reflection of the light to see any imperfection that instantly shows up. And so on a metal airplane or composite, if you see a little spot like that, as long as it's in primer, you can instantly fix it. Once that top coat goes on, that is not a good thing. Okay, one of the things with waterbornes, we spend a lot of effort to make sure that you guys and gals have all the information that you need to make our products work well. And so we recommend that you follow these procedures. A lot of times we'll get phone calls and people start telling us the problems that they're having. And it's pretty obvious that they didn't read these little couple papers. It probably takes 5 minutes to read them. So anyway, if you, the paper that we send, the instructions on the can. One thing about instructions is that when we put a DVD out or it goes on printed instructions, once that's printed, you can never change it. If you pick up that paper 10 years later and you read it as gospel, it may have changed in those few years. So when you get a new can of paint, always check it. A good example, a few years ago we recommended mixing our EkoPoly and EkoCrylic 3-to-1 by volume and then use a viscosity cup. Well, when DuPont sold to Axalta, they discontinued the M50 viscosity cup, so we can't get them anymore. We went to 4-to-1 by weight. So all I'm saying is things change, so be aware of that, because a label, and it may be not our choice, but EPA or some other organization may make us change the label. So every time you get a can of paint, make sure that the label's current. The use of waterborne tack cloths, I just wanted to show it here. They still have some of the other ones, but when you take them apart, they're usually yellow and they're very sticky. The waterbornes come apart real easy. They actually do a way better job than the old beeswax type. And so, very important. That's what they look like. They're kind of a blue. There's all kinds of different ones. They're either going to say suitable for waterborne or suitable for all substrates. As long as they say that, you're good to go. And I can't think, I mean, every paint store I've ever been in anymore has got them. So more and more. Okay, isopropyl alcohol. Use the 90%. There's 3 different grades that I'm aware of. There may be more. But they got 90%, a 70%, and a 99%. The 90% works the best, 90 or 91. 70% has too much water in it, and there's no sense paying the extra price. The 99%, we've had some issues. We don't know if that was from that or not, but you can't hardly find it anyway. And the 90% is so easy to come by. A lot of times Walmart, all your drugstores have got it. It's not expensive. We want 5 to 10 minutes dry time. And when we say don't scrub it or wipe lightly, what we found works the best, over primer. There's 2 ways to use alcohol, but we're going to be talking about over primer. What you want to do is take a cloth, lint-free cloth, put your alcohol in a little trigger spray bottle and spritz that cloth. Don't soak it down. And very gently wipe it. You're not going to turn it, it's not going to wet it. Because what happens if it wets it, because primer is a porous product, it can soak into it, and even though it looks dry, it's still not dry enough, so when you start putting the top coat on it, you can have an issue. We've had customers call, and from what they described, it sounded like they had, something was still on the primer. So I asked them, did you wipe it with alcohol? I sure did. I dosed it down twice, really good. Well, that's a problem. Now you can do that on a top coat. We'll talk about that in a minute too. But on the primers, very light wiping, that's all it takes. Does two things, gets rid of the dust, and it's an anti-static. It helps repel dust when you spray. Then follow it with a tack cloth. Once that tack cloth. Yes, sir?
Save for aluminum on that?
Pardon?
Save for aluminum?
Absolutely. Yeah, what we're talking about now on this is the primer over, doesn't matter what it is. Yeah, yeah. And that's, we just use the little surface prep lint-free towels. They're great. I've used terry towels. A lot of people don't like the terry because of the lint comes off. But I can tell you, if you've got a project and it's primered, and you start wiping it with terry and it starts pulling fuzzies off, you're not ready to paint. I mean, anything that comes off of a cotton towel onto a part is just laying there. If anything grabs it, like I say, you're not ready to paint, because there's nothing by this point should ever grab a wiping cloth. So just very lightly on the wiping on the primer. That's the main thing we're trying to get across. Now we're going to start talking about painting equipment, because regardless of what you're going to paint, this is a very important part of this presentation, because we've had over the years of tech calls, biggest problem with painting is equipment related. And so there's so many things out there. There's all kinds of spray guns. There's, you know, we've formulated this paint for spray guns, and the reason we say that is that the conventional spray guns used to use a lot of air, and the volume wasn't so much, but there was a lot of overspray. And so with the paint, two-part catalyzed paints cost a lot more than they used to. With a good HVLP gun, you'll save enough on paint cost, because it transfers so much paint, that you will buy a spray gun. So if you got an old conventional gun, don't use it. Clean air is absolutely mandatory. You got to make sure you have an air compressor that's not putting oil in the lines. A lot of people use a oilless, or they'll use a turbine type gun. I'm not a big fan of turbines because I haven't used them that much. They do work. I know that not many, or I've never seen a professional paint shop use the turbines, but I have seen some very nice paint jobs with them, so they do work. You're going to need a big compressor. We'll talk about that in a minute, how to do that. And just main thing is, don't cut corners on air on an HVLP gun. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit too. We talk about clean air. We like to get down to 100th micron filtration. We like to really make sure that everything comes out of that air. The important part is to get the moisture out of there. If you live in a high humid area, that is a problem. Some guys have gone to the desiccant type dryer filters. We've put a refrigerated air dryer in our shop. You can buy one from Harbor Freight for about $400, and that sounds like a lot of money until you figure what it costs to paint an airplane. Sometimes that's the only option that you have. So in a regulator, we need a really good regulator. We'll get into that here in a few minutes as well. But this is basically out of the compressor, directly out of the compressor into this, out of the regulator and right to your spray gun, unless you need some more filtration or a water trap type. This is the setup that we use. High flow connectors are something that's been around just a few years now. We used to not have them. We had a lot of people that we'd go to their shops who were really struggling to paint, and we would find that they would have several of the quick disconnects in the system. Well, on a DeVilbiss spray gun, or most of your HVLP guns, they require a lot of air. So high volume, low pressure means a lot of air. So what happens when you choke that air down into a small quick disconnect, every time it passes through a little 3/16 hole, you got to start bumping that pressure up higher and higher and higher, and that really starts causing some problems. So we now have the high flow quick disconnects, and so those will pass probably 3 times the amount of air of the others. If you have this type, make sure you only have one of them. That's got to be at the gun, and everything else is hard plumbed in. If you have 2 or 3 of these, you're not going to deliver the air to that HVLP gun like you need. Make sure of that. If you got the bigger type, you can run a couple of them. So very important to get the air to those guns if you want a good job. An HVLP spray gun will start to lose performance if you lose 1 pound of air. 2 pounds, 3 pounds, it is absolutely, they're not going to perform. 3 pounds is huge on that type of spray gun. A big compressor, not everybody can have a 220 volt, 5 horsepower air compressor to get 15 CFM to run a 13 CFM gun. What we've done, and we've done it several times, we've gone into places that didn't have enough air, but they had 210 volt air compressors, and each one of them will put out, say, 6 or 7 CFM. Simply take a little pipe, tee them together, plug them both in. What we do is plug one in, let it start up, plug the other one in. Even if you're limited on your power, they're both, I've never seen one or two of them start at the same time. One will start and then pretty quick the other one will start. But you can run them in parallel and get the air. And even if you have to buy 2, buy them, do your project, and when you get through, sell one, get your money back, and you've not spent $1,500 or $2,000 for a big one. Paint guns are real important. We stock and sell the Finish Line 4 and the Pro-Lite. The reason for the DeVilbiss is because DeVilbiss is a good quality. And the Finish Line 4 spray gun is what we consider minimum to do a really good job on painting an entire airplane. A cheap gun will do small parts, but the problem is the fan is not wide enough, and you start using a cheap gun, you can pretty well tell if the gun is of lower quality and you don't want it if it comes with a 1.4 nozzle. A better gun is always going to have the option of going with a 1.3 that we really need to have. Plus it'll have a 1.5 and a 1.8, and you can use them for all kinds of things. We also recommend any type of HVLP because of its transfer. The reduced pressure or the high efficiency type gun, Pro-Lite's your reduced pressure, they'll run about 10 CFM instead of the 13, but they cost a lot more money. You'd think because they use less air they're cheaper, but that's not the case. Always spray test patterns first. We're going to show you how to do that in a couple minutes here. And so learn how to use your equipment before painting your airplane. That is really important. We like to take a test part, mix up a little bit of paint and paint it, make sure everything's working right. So many people start doing their testing on the airplane and then they have to start sanding it down. The problem with that is when you start painting on your aircraft, you want everything painted exactly the same. Unless you're going to put a lot of paint on there and get up to full color saturation, which you really need to do on yellow. But it's very important that everything is painted the same. So if you have to start painting things twice, you're going to have a little shade difference in it. And that's just the nature of how paint works. So try to do your experimenting on something other than your airplane that you're going to finish with. That's the DeVilbiss Pro-Lite. Some people go ahead and spend the money for it. They're great guns. The more you spend on a gun as a rule, the better they are. The fans are wider. This one has a no-stick type surface on it. Quite honestly, with the waterborne paint and using our EkoClean as a final cleanup, that's really not a big plus. We can keep an aluminum spray gun with our heavy-duty cleaner after you clean up with water and you do the final cleaning with our EkoClean. They're going to stay looking brand new. I mean, it's just that easy to clean this stuff up. If I'm going to do a car or something that's a show quality, I've got a Iwata spray gun. I really like it. It's got a lot wider fan pattern on it, and they all come with the 1.3 nozzle. So anyway, that's some of the spray guns. One thing about if you want to use an inexpensive gun for some of your smaller parts, and like a Harbor Freight, you got a little $60 spray gun. We bought one, we tried it, we've sprayed a lot of color charts. It sprays really as good as the big ones on small parts. The fan is too small. But in order to get that to spray like that, it's not really an HVLP spray gun. HVLPs use there's very low air pressure, and they'll do a great job of atomizing. The Harbor Freight gun we found needs 35 to 40 pounds on the gauge on the handle. They'll work, but that's not HVLP. You're going to get some overspray with it. So if you have one, use it, but just if it's not working right, don't hesitate to turn that air up. You can get by with it on some things.
What's the HVLP run at? air pressure wise?
Well, it depends on the spray gun. See, that's another thing. A lot of people will call and say, how much air do I run? And that's one of the things that we ran across with our videos, because we used the finish line spray gun, and we set it at, years ago when we did the video, at 20 pounds because that's what they recommended. Well, now the finish line 4 spray gun recommends 23 pounds. And that's with the trigger pulled and the fan control wide open. You set it to 23 pounds, and that works very well. So read whatever comes with a spray gun, read it. They'll recommend that for the gun. It always seems to work better with a little more than less. If you have a choice, give it a little more. Okay, and that's where this comes in. Now, some of the spray guns you're going to buy won't have a gauge on the handle. They'll have a third little knob. We pick up one of these. This hooks right to the spray gun, and this is where the air hose comes in. If you have that third control and there's no gauge, you have no idea where it is. You have to go by sound and by feel and everything. What we want to show you here, HVLP spray guns do not recommend a regulator at the gun. You want the regulator at the wall, and you want a very good regulator at the wall. And at the gun, we don't use a regulator. A lot of folks call these regulators, but these are needle valves. Now, what happens with a needle valve is that as the air pressure increases, they flow more air through them because it's a needle. It doesn't regulate it, it just restricts the flow. Now, what happens is when you set your spray gun up, your air compressor is fully up on pressure, 120 pounds, say. So you get this all set and life's good. You're coming right out of your compressor to it, you get it all set up, you start spraying. Now, as you spray, your compressor starts dropping air pressure. So you go from 120 pounds, now you're down to 90 pounds before your compressor comes back on. The air that passes through this is now less. And so if you were to look at your gauge, you had a gauge on, instead of 23 pounds, you're going to be down to 19 or 20 pounds. It's enough. I've had people call and they say, I've got parts of my wing that are beautiful and parts that have orange peel. What's going on? And I say, do you have a regulator from your compressor, your spray gun? You don't, do you? No. That's exactly what happens, because 1 pound starts to degrade your spray job. So 2 or 3 pounds, it's huge. I mean, you go from a nice job to a terrible job. So we put the gauge on here. And what we do on the regulator to know how much air that you put to that gun, a lot of people say, where do I set my regulator? Okay, your spray gun requires 23 pounds, your compressor's pumped up, and you've got, let's say you've got the small, well, let's go to the big one. You got the big high flow quick disconnect on here. I like to be able to go past my 23 pounds to say 30 pounds. I know I've got plenty of air. So I go regulate the wall to where I can get only 30 pounds at this gauge. Now, the importance of that is that if this gauge, when you pull off let off on your trigger, and this thing goes up to 80 pounds, because that's what it takes to go through that little tiny quick disconnect to get 23 pounds, you get a huge spike every time you pull that trigger on that spray gun. You get a pulse of too much paint that comes out on that. I mean, it does add up doing that. So run your regulator to where it will only go to about 30 pounds. Now, if you got the high flow regulator, you can do that 30 pounds with about 40 pounds at the regulator. I mean, there's that difference. If you use a small quick disconnect like we showed you, you're going to have to run this over at about 70 pounds or maybe 80. It takes a lot more air to push that 13 CFM through that real small quick disconnect. So stick with this is a preferred one that I really like, and you can buy them all by themselves. Most paint stores will sell them. They're not real expensive, but they absolutely work. Yes?
So what you're basically saying is that you set the gun regulator at 30 pounds, even though it only requires 23.
I want more, but then I back it down to, I want to know that I can go to 30. But I set it back to the 23 pounds that it's supposed to have. You don't want to, if the gun takes 23 pounds, you don't want it to, that's all it will do. You're right, you're going to starve that gun if you do that. Have a surplus of air. That's all I'm saying, is make sure you got plenty of air. And you can do that, you can prove that you do by being able to take that gauge to 30 pounds.
All right, so at the wall, at the air compressor, you're going to be setting that thing up somewhere around a 40-pound delivery. checking it at the gun at 30 pounds.
Yes.
It says before you spray, you set the gun back down to 23 pounds.
Yes, you put it back. That 30 pounds is only a test to make sure you got plenty of air. Yeah, that's just your setup on the regulator to do that. Yeah, okay. Okay, when you're getting ready to spray, we talk a little bit about safety equipment with the waterborne paint. It doesn't take a whole lot of protection. We wear a Tyvek suit because we want to keep the overspray off of us. If you're in a spray booth and you're spraying, you got short sleeve shirts on and you get white and it get a little bit of overspray on you, and you get all done and you clean up your spray gun and you're miring your parts and you forget to wash your arms and that stuff sets up on you, you're going to wear it for a couple weeks. I mean, it's not coming off. So we wear that. Plus, not only that, but if you're painting, a lot of us paint in the wintertime, we're wearing a flannel shirt, things like that. If you were to look at that in a light and blow yourself, dust is just going crazy. I mean, everywhere. Put that suit on and that encapsulates all that dust of your clothes. You walk in there and it's nice and clean. You put on the 3M, this is 3M is what we recommend. There's all kinds of organic paint masks. We like the name 3M. We know it's good. It works great. Test it. You know, put your hand over it and breathe in. If you have facial hair, you really need to watch it because if that thing leaks, you're going to breathe some paint in there. You don't want to do that. So do whatever you have to do. So when you put your hand over the intake of this and breathe in, you've got to create a vacuum and you can't suck air in. If you can breathe in, it's not working right. So that's the main two things, the Tyvek suit and the respirator. These have a life. They don't last forever. Once you open it up and you let air to it, they're only good for a few weeks. You could do a project, but if you're painting a lot, keep those cartridges replaced. So we talked about, I told you I was going to show you how do you check your spray gun. We do this quite often before we start spraying. We've had the same spray guns for a lot of years. An HVLP spray gun's got a lot of little tiny holes. Now I don't know how you guys' eyesights are, but you know those holes are pretty small and sometimes I have to look really hard to see them. But you can hold them up to a light and they're tiny. They're very tiny. I keep a little tiny set of wires to keep them cleaned out. But what happens if everything's not exactly right on the spray guns, you're going to have all of these patterns. There's only one pattern on here that's acceptable, and that's right here. It's a very nice oval. And so if you have a curved type, you have a dog bone or any effect like that, anything that you see up there, and what we do is take a piece of masking paper or white butcher paper, we tape it on the wall, and we'll hold the spray gun up and we'll just pull the trigger and let up on it to see that pattern. We won't hold it long enough. You don't want to get a run. You just want to spray it, let up, just to see what you got. This is what we're looking for. Now, the next thing, we get a lot of questions from folks, how much overlap do I give my spray gun? Well, it depends on the spray gun because every spray gun is different. We do that with this test down here. This is where we want to put it on the same pattern. Now we want to hold that trigger until we get a run in the system. We want to see a run and we want to see how that run develops. So we turn the nozzle to a horizontal position and we'll set it up and we'll pull it, and as that paint starts to run, this is the normal pattern that you're going to see from that. This isn't so good right here because it's like that. This is not so bad right here. This is pretty good. Now, the thing that you want to look for on your paint overlap is so when you overlap from one to the other, that this is your 100% amount of paint, this starts to taper off. So you want that other overlap to come right into here so these two equal your 100%. So what happens if you space this next pass too wide, you're going to have the proper amount of paint to less paint, proper amount of paint to less paint. It's what we call tiger striping. And that goes from a very shiny paint to a little bit of a roughness to where you can actually, some tiger striping is so bad that when you do that, you're going to actually see the primer through it. That's a real bad case of that. So, but pay attention to this test, then you'll know where that overlap is on your spray gun. A good paint job is all about gun control and keeping the distance and everything just right and keeping that overlap right.
This is a real good test to tell you where you're at on that spray gun.
What's the distance you normally spray at?
Well, a lot of your VLPs, this is it right here, 5 to 7 inches, right there. And a lot of times I'll go a little closer. That's why it's real important to have a big fan, you know, a nice wide fan. Now, a fog coat, that's different. We're talking about wet coats. This, you know, your wet coat. We got a little painting demonstration that we're gonna show you here in a little bit, the difference of techniques of fog coat to tack coat and why we use one and not the other. And so, but this is the first step to painting right here, whether it's primer or whatever, know what that spray gun's doing. A lot of times you can take nozzles on your spray gun, just put them in some lacquer thinner and let them soak for a while and blow them out and it'll straighten all that right up. Okay, we're going to talk about our top coat now. We have two different ones. They both have different reasons and purposes. The EkoPoly Premium is designed for fabric. It's a very flexible type paint. But the beauty of the EkoPoly Premium is that once you start painting your fabric covered airplane, you paint all of it. Doesn't matter if it's metal or whatever, it works great. I mean, it's a great paint. The disadvantage of EkoPoly Premium is that it's very flexible, it's very tough, but it doesn't like to be wet sanded and polished. You can, but it's a lot of work and it doesn't work well. In order to buff a paint, you gotta have a paint that's hard. Hard equals brittle. On fabric, hard equals cracks. So EkoPoly Premium is not gonna crack on your fabric. So we use EkoPoly Premium. If you're going to do a fabric covered airplane, paint everything, the whole deal. A lot of times we'll get a quart of the EkoCrylic and paint just the fuselage because I like painting it a lot better. It's the same color, it'll look the same, mixes the same. They're both real high performance coating. Got a minimum 3-hour pot life. If you got some parts you paint, you got a little paint left over and you want to use a little bit later on, you can put it in a refrigerator, and a lot of times I've used it the next morning. Don't exceed that. And another thing, don't fill your container you put in the refrigerator completely full, because when it starts to catalyze, it's going to expand. And so whatever color's in that little cans now is your refrigerator's going to be that color. So trust me, I did it. Fog coats to achieve a tack wet coat. We're going to explain that in a little bit. Cleans up with water, 2 simple rules. This is very important on our EkoCrylic and EkoPoly Premium. Don't over thin it. We give you instructions to mix it with a ratio weight of 4 to 1 to 1. That's a starting point. Your spray gun, if you don't like how it sprays, you think it's a little too thick, you can go another 5%, but don't overdo it. Try to keep it. It needs a 5-minute induction time. All that's on the label. Maintain temperature 12 hours after painting. That's very important to guys that have, they're painting in a hangar. It's the winter time and you don't have really good heat. If you're going to paint in the winter and all you have is a hanger, try to build yourself a little visqueen plastic enclosure that you can put your parts in. Put a little electric heater, 1500 watts will keep the temperature you need, but keep it in the 60s. Upper 60s is better, but mid 60s is about as low as we want this paint to go for the first 12 hours. Give it time to catalyze and cure, and that's very important. Alaska guys have a little trouble with that. Okay, we're gonna do a little painting presentation. What we're doing is a repaint. This is an existing, it's the center section, a little biplane. It was kind of ugly, so we sanded it down and we took some white primer and we touched up the spots that were bad. So all we're doing is a repaint. This is what we call a tack coat, wet coat. Now an attack coat wet coat is the place, because it's got paint on it, you can take a lint-free cloth and you can put alcohol in it, wet it pretty good, because this thing's flown. It's probably got oils and stuff. It doesn't hurt to dose it pretty good with some alcohol. Don't do that on primer, but on existing paint, on a repaint, you can do that. So what we're showing is, you see his gun is there about 5 to 7 inches, and he's going pretty good clip because it's a tack coat. In a tack coat, you don't want it to turn shiny. You just want everything nice and solid, and the purpose of that, when it tacks off, is when you put the wet coat, it's going to prevent sags and runs. So this is going to be a single tack coat with a single wet coat to give the results that we want. The next part, as soon as we're done with this one, we're going to do a fog coat to color saturation and then a wet coat. The thing that we're trying to show is that there's very little difference. It's very hard to see the difference between a tack coat and a wet coat paint job as it is to a fog coat to full color saturation and then a wet coat. We'll try to explain the differences for you.
Is there time durations between the tacks and the fog? that you normally-
Well, the only thing, there are variations to that. The key to it is that you have to let each one tack up. That depends on humidity, temperature, how heavy you put it on. So there's not, we used to say wait 5 minutes. A lot of our instruction videos, if you watch the DVDs, you wait 5 minutes. But we also tell you at the end of that to test it, make sure it's tacked. EkoPoly Premium, we've slowed it down. You got a 3-hour pot life. It rushed people too much. We slowed the tack time. You may have 30 minutes between tack coats. I can tell you it's way better to wait a few minutes than run out of time, always. So just be patient. You're not going to set up in your gun. Just sit back, let it tack. Once it tacks, go to the next coat. That's your finished coat right there. We did that pretty quick, but we waited from the tack coat about 30 minutes. We let it tack off. We put a single wet coat, and that's how that was. That's the finish. If you look at that finish compared to what we have over at the booth, you're going to see about the same results. Very shiny.
You waited 30 minutes on that tack time?
Probably. A tack coat, you normally are going to wait about 30 minutes before you give the next coat. Now, the issue with that is if you're doing a real small part, it's really, it's a nuisance. But if you're doing a big wing, by the time you get all the way around it, you're not waiting very long. So it's wonderful on a large part. Kind of a nuisance if you only have to do one piece. A lot of times I'll set the timer, I'll go do something else. I've always said, if you're going to paint, don't do anything else. But with the slow down, as long as you pay attention to it, set the timer on your phone or whatever, go back and put the next coat. It works very well. Okay, let's go to the next one here. Okay, this is a tack or a fog coat to a wet coat. What we're painting here, this is aluminum set of wingtips for a Cessna 150. It's going over smoke gray primer. We're putting white on it. So what he's doing here is a fog coat. If you see that, got the gun turned down, he's going pretty good clip. A fog coat on the very first coat is going to be between 50 and 75% coverage. You're still going to see the primer through it. The goal, regardless of the color, is to try to have full color saturation in 3 fog coats. Now, if you're doing black, you're going to put one fog coat on there, you're going to come back and wet it because black covers so well. Silver covers so well, you can probably do 2. But on a lot of them, I like to give it the 3rd coat, let it come up to the full color saturation. He just checked it. However long it takes, all you want to see is no wet paint transfer. As soon as you can give it a light touch and you don't get paint on your finger, give it that next coat. If you rush it, it's what we call don't put wet on wet. If you do that, good chance you're going to get solvent popping. So it starts turning into little bubbles. And so painting small parts, if you're just starting out, painting small parts in a vertical is a really good way to do it because a lot of people say, how heavy is the wet coat? Well, you put it on to where it just doesn't run. That's true of any paint job. You push that line, the closer you can get it to where it just doesn't run, the better your paint job's going to be. If you start getting runs in it, you cross the line, you put too much on it. And so, but that is painting. I mean, it's always been all about that. Almost every paint job you've ever got, there you see a little sag. Well, anytime you push it that close, you're going to, normally you might end up with a little sag or 2. Our fog coats are always put on cross coats, in other words, 90 degrees to each other. You put one on, let's say you're north and south, the next one's east and west. The next one, if it's the 3rd one, you come into it. On a wing, I like to do let's say I'm going to do 2 cross coats. 3 fog coats and a wet coat, and your wing is a full panel. I like my last coat to be the north and south. I like for my gun to come in and go up and come down, and what that does is prevents me having joining areas on a full wet coat to where I can double it up and get a sag in it. So I go this way, and I start at one end and I go all the way to the other end. We used to have to, on a heavier, on the tack coat operations, we used to have to split when we were going sideways. We'd give one coat and we'd stop. The next coat we'd stop at a different place so we wouldn't get that heavy buildup. But that's what we're doing there. Does that make sense? Okay, now we painted the parts, we've got everything done. Now you're going to come in there and you're going to take a good look at them. And if you're lucky and good, there are no, you don't have any of these. But if you're like most of us, you don't have a real good paint facility. And so there are, in any paint job, there are going to be some of these. Now, on a base coat, clear coat guys at the body shops, they have plenty of these, but they're going to wet sand them and they're going to buff it out, and so those disappear. So they don't have that problem. But if you have done a poor job of sanding the primer down and it was rough for a little bit, it's going to still be rough when you put your top coat on it. I've had a lot of people say, well, the paint job will fix it. Unfortunately, the top coats don't fix a whole lot of anything. What happens is it magnifies them and actually makes them look worse. So the time to fix those is before you put the top coat on it. Try to get that everything sanded down and really, really looking good. Orange peel, that's normally caused by two things. There's other things that can cause it, but primarily orange peel is from the paint's too thick, too heavy for the nozzle size that you use, or it's lack of air. We were talking about keeping plenty of air to a spray gun, and if you starve an HVLP, this is going to be the result of it. So normally lack of air or too thick of viscosity on your paint. Trash and paint, this is the kicker right here. This is what really gives us a lot of trouble. That's one of the reasons that when we call trash and paint, that's dust or anything. Some of us have gotten too close to the painted parts with our shirt, and at least, we mess it up. Trash, whatever. A lot of this, after you paint it, people ask about tack time. Once your part's painted and it starts to set up, as dust gets into it, or a bug or anything like that, those are the type of things that after you put your airplane together and you wash them a few times, a lot of those go away. They just snap right off. I mean, they do. As you work on your airplane, they do go away. Solvent pop or entrapment, that's from the first rule we said, do not put wet on wet. There's a good chance that's going to happen. If you get a real heavy run and it comes down, it's going to entrap some solvents, and when it dries, it's going to have a little bubbling. That's the same thing. Fish eyes are from contamination. On the EkoPoly, we talked about water. That's why we want to use the alcohol. Don't put anything on with water. That can cause some fish eyes. Another thing is when you're spraying in your shop, don't use anything that's in an aerosol can, particularly silicone. That will give fish eyes all over the place, sometimes huge ones. Be very careful of paper towels, wiping your parts down. We talk about microfiber towels and things. We've had people that have used some paper towels. Some of them are treated and oh my gosh, it's a mess. I don't use paper towels except for wiping the glue off of our initial glue job on fabric. Runs are really kind of a problem because on the EkoCrylic you can use a run razor, you can sand them down, you can buff them out. On a fabric type airplane, they're very difficult to get rid of. What we do a lot of times on a run, if you want to sand a run out, don't grab a piece of sandpaper and just start sanding on it. What we do is take some vinyl tape and we go around the run as close to it as we can, just stay off of the run, but tape it out to where you cannot get the sandpaper into the surrounding area. What happens is you start sanding a run, incidental contact to the surrounding area, before long you're down to the primer and the run's still there. So what we do is tape around it, block sand it, take a little sandpaper and put it on a block. You block sand the run out until you're down to the thickness of the run. Then you can take your finger and finish bringing it on down, pull the tape off of it. Then you can go ahead and buff it out, and it might leave a little tiny area, but it doesn't look too bad. Adhesion between layers. Remember, water-based paints are a mechanical bond. Make sure that every layer is sanded and cleaned quite well, and that will prevent lack of adhesion between your layers. Pinholes. That's an issue on some fabric airplanes. If you don't get all the weave of the fabric completely filled, paint will not bridge a pinhole. and it's just, it will always leave a little hole in there. So on fiberglass, if you don't get you need to really look at fiberglass, because a lot of times raw fiberglass parts will have a lot of pinholes in it. And we use things like glazing putty and things like that to fill them up. So they're always a problem. We've got a lot of, I've heard some of you say that you've watched some of our stuff on YouTube. We try to put a lot of things on YouTube because it's instant and it changes quite easily. We're the only system that is approved by the FAA for repair or repaint over any other system. Doesn't matter what you got on your airplane. Doesn't matter if it's polyfiber, Superflight, AirTech. It doesn't matter what it is. We're legal to use our products to repair that and put the paint on it. So we're the only system that can do that. We got that included on the STC because at Hangar 21, we have the wingtip for the Piper aircraft, and when we installed them, we had no idea what was on the airplane, and we wanted to use our system, so we showed the FAA that regardless of the system, it worked quite well, and they agreed with us and allowed it. So we're real proud of that. If you have a shop, you only need our products to fix anything out there legally.